I'm Keith Tutor. I've got a great idea. Let's rock. Welcome to another Easy Rock presentation on the making and creating of your own artificial rock. This video title demonstrates the techniques of building hollow rock and transportable boulders, and the results are quite amazing. This is a piece of paradise, and also a place where there's lots of rocks and some very interesting ideas of how to use them. So let's go and have a look and see what we can discover. Handmade artificial rock steps. Spacious, easy to walk on, and very economical if you make them yourself. To get yourself around the garden, some stepping stones, also handmade. Now spread throughout the setting here are quite a few large boulders, and most of them have been made with the same techniques on the video. These boulders are not ordinary boulders because they're hollow. They're handmade, and they're also what I call plantable boulders. This tree was planted into this rock after soil was placed in it, which will now grow up and shade this area so that when you have a shower after you get out of the pool in summer, it's nice and cool. Now this rock by the poolside is ideal for putting a tray of drinks on. This is you put your feet up, lay back, rock combination. These two rocks have been designed to frame the entry to the pool area. Over here we have a beautiful flowering grass plant just growing out of this rock. And what I really like about this idea, apart from the fact that the plants grow so well in these particular pieces, is how they're at a different height from the rest of the planting, which adds a really lovely feature to the garden. A handmade plantable bowl, but I just haven't got around to planting it yet, but when I do, I'm quite sure it's going to be a very nice feature here around the poolside area. The thing that I've always been amazed of with gardens is how much better and how much more effective a garden looks with large pieces of rock spread around. Now the really good thing about this is that the techniques that you're learning on this video are the same techniques that I've used to be able to do this. So with a little bit of patience and perseverance, there's no reason why you can't get that imagination happening and do whatever you like. And you can make something like this. Now to get started, you're going to need either a workbench or a sturdy table. The tools required are pretty basic. You're going to need some wire cutters, some pliers, a pair of scissors, an old screwdriver, and as far as our materials go, first thing we start with is weld mesh or galvanised wire. Now this particular piece here comes in a 2x3 size or 50x75mm. You can also use a 3x3 inch size or a 75x75mm, but it should be, say, an average of a 1/12 of an inch gauge or 2mm in the metric scale. This particular gauge of wire is quite sturdy, particularly when you start to crumple it up together, but it's also really easy to manipulate with your hands. So the pieces I'll cut off a roll, I'll make sure they're a different size. For example, I'd like to build a rock around about a 1/2 cubic metre size or a 1/2 cubic yard. So what I'll do is cut the base for this rock first. Now this transportable rock I'm going to be building will have a full body, meaning it will have a bottom on it. So generally the bottom will be the biggest piece that you would cut off your roll, and then I'll cut some smaller pieces to add to it. Say two about half the size of your original cut, and then just a couple of sizes smaller, so that what you end up with is a variation of size cuts. Now as far as shape goes, there's a few different things you can do. You can do exactly what I've just explained, which is to cut your pieces into different sizes, or you can go out and take some photos of real rocks and reproduce the look of them. To make some sense and shape out of this pile of wire, I need to take each piece, fold it up and then crumple it underfoot. Start with the biggest piece first. Make sure before you start doing this you have suitable footwear. Protective footwear is the main thing you've got to have because there's spikes sticking up. So what you can do is just fold over into 4 pieces. Pick it up, just keeping in mind that this is your bottom, and yeah, just unfold it, just being careful you don't spike yourself in the head, and you'll end up with something like that. To join the wire, you need a couple more things. The first item here is called easy pliers. They have a small indent which is designed to take easy clips. So what you do is you take this clip, put it inside the pliers, squeeze them shut like that, and that will tie your wire together. So what I'm going to do is just bend the ends up first, like so. Now, getting a shape like this is quite simple, but just keep in mind I'm not working off a photograph or anything. I'm just going to see what I end up with. So I'm just going to bend these ends up first, and I'll take one of the smaller pieces of wire and attach that to the narrowest end of my future rock shape. As long as you get 1 or 2 clips on, that'll hold it in place, and then you can continue on in other areas. I'll just turn it over, pull it tight, and slip your clip in. That should be enough to fasten it. Now the next piece I'm going to use will be down this end, and I'll use one of the bigger pieces I cut, of which I have 2. I'll just unfold that and join it along the back here. Now one of the things you've got to make sure you do as well is try and overlap your joins, meaning that this added piece you're putting on overlaps the piece that you're joining onto. This will just make it a lot stronger. So we'll just turn that over and I'll clip that together. I'm going to add one more piece now and clip the whole thing together and see what sort of shape I'm going to come up with, because as I said earlier, I've got no idea how this is going to turn out, not just yet anyway. So I'll use another one of my bigger pieces. Just unfold that out and just pull one side across. Just want to tighten this up a bit and make it firmer, so we'll join and overlap this existing piece that I've already put on to the bottom. Simple way to find out where the most suitable place is to put a clip is just move your combining wires up and down until you press it forward, and you can actually feel where it should stop, where there's X amount of pressure, and yes, that's where to join it. It ends up settling quite firm. So I've just turned this future rock over, so it's sitting on its top at the moment. But what I want to do is just bend down these pieces here so that it makes it nice and tight in this corner. This is where a screwdriver comes in really handy, because what you can actually do is force it into these through a gap and then just use it as a lever to force that down, and it will really tighten up. Now if you have little pieces like this sticking out, it's best to get rid of them. So the simple way to do that is just get a pair of pliers and just bend them down like that. Once a hollow rock starts getting over a half a cubic yard or metre in size, you may need a bit of inner support, particularly if these rocks are going to be sat on. A simple and effective method for doing this is to pack the inside of your frame with recycled pieces of foam. I do have another piece left over that I cut earlier, so what I'd like to do with that is just fill this gap in here and also bring the pieces closer together so it's nice and tight. In a very short space of time, you can see the wire frame is starting to get the look of a real rock, and that the way this has been applied has been quite effortless. This is called Easy Mat. It's a woven plastic type material that when attached to a wire frame such as this makes an excellent surface to cover with a mortar or gravel type mix. So I've been using this for quite a few years now, and it's an excellent material for rock making, as you'll see. The good news is we use exactly the same pliers and the same clips to attach this fabric to the frame. Technique is very simple. Just use one hand to hold your mat and frame down firmly, and with a clip in the pliers, clip into your fabric and around the steel frame itself, thereby holding it all together. Now what's very important here is that the first clip you put in should start in the middle. Let's get another clip and work out from that. Don't put a clip here and then suddenly put one around the corner. Now the really important thing here is that this fabric is stretched tight so that when your surface mortar mix is actually put on, or in this case the undercoat, this mat is holding firm onto the frame and thereby holds your mortar mix together as well. Here you can see I'm just working out from the centre. I'll just stretch that mat out and put a clip in and keep it nice and tight. That's the main rule, so don't forget that, particularly when you start to work down on your edges. There's only so far you can go with clipping down your edges here before you need to turn the frame over. But before you do that, if you can, just go along and do the pinch test. So what you're doing is actually checking to see if there's any pieces that are going to pull out once weight is attached to it. So you can see here how this pulls out. So just push that down and clip it on, and it'll hold it down nice and firm. So just go along and check your clipping and just make sure it's pretty firm. If you're happy with that, All you do is turn it over and take one side of your fabric and pull it as tight as you can. Start from the corner and work your way across, and then we'll pull the other side up to meet with that. And all you'll need is a pair of scissors just to trim up the edges. There's one problem you're likely to run into, which is not really a problem, but where you are going to get excess easy mat, which is going to fold over each other and end up being like big lumps in the side of your work. Well, you really don't want those, because you're going to have to use so much mortar mix to get in and cover that. It's unnecessary. It's going to put extra weight on your work. So the simple thing to do is just let your fold where you know there's going to be excess fabric just come out on its own natural course. Take a pair of scissors and cut down the centre. You see how easy that fabric cuts? And then decide one edge that you're going to clip down, so that in this case I'm going to fold down this side, and then I'll just cut this to suit. So after a few cuts here and there, what I'm left with is a nice clean joint, which is going to be easy to mortar over the top of. The only thing that needs to be done now is just to go along with a pair of scissors and just clean up and trim any bits and pieces of easy mat that may be sticking up, and that's about it. I can't see any more that needs to be done, so this piece is now ready to go on to the next stage. There's a few basic tools you'll need to recreate the look of realistic rock. When I say basic, I really do mean basic. First item is a paintbrush, but not like this. This is too new, it's too good. What you do need is old, recycled paintbrushes, the sort of paintbrushes that are no good for painting anymore. They're ready to be thrown out. Perhaps if you know a painter or someone that professionally paints and they're going to be throwing some brushes out, these are ideal and they shouldn't cost you any money. The second item is a screwdriver, preferably an old one. That's about it as far as your tools go. You may have heard me mention by now the words aggregate mix, mortar mix, undercoat mix. So what does this all mean in relation to building hollow rock? Let's start with an aggregate mix. This is a combination of three materials: a coarse sand, a fine sand, and a neat cement, or what's sold as a builder's cement. Now a mortar mix is a combination of two materials. That's a fine sand and a neat cement. To make an undercoat, particularly with making hollow rock, it needs to be very firm and very strong. So I find a combination of aggregate, which is the coarse sand, fine sand and neat cement mixed together, plus a product called a rock bonding fibre. Now what you do with rock bonding fibre is mix it in with your aggregate mixes, and what this will do is help to prevent fracturing and cracking of your cement surface. So you take 3 parts combined sand and mix it with 1 part cement and add a small amount of rock bonding fibre. And I want to make a very strong recommendation that when handling any cement product, you always wear protective gloves. It's a good idea. Good thing with doing this indoors is that if you don't have a cement mixer, it doesn't matter, because you can just do your mixing in any type of drum. Avoid doing large mixes to start with. 3 parts combined sand and 1 part cement will cover quite a lot of area. The container now holds a 3 sand, 1 cement, which was placed with this spade, as you would have seen. Now for this size mix, using a spade such as this, you would only need to add a very small handful of rock bonding fibre into that 3-to-1 combination. And this is where things get hands-on. Now it's very important that your sand and cement is well mixed. The eventual mix itself should be quite wet or sloppy. We don't want a dry mix for an undercoat. Just make sure you dig right down to the bottom when you're doing this. Otherwise it won't mix properly. Make a little hole in the centre and pour in some water. Better just put your water in as small quantities at a time so you don't overwet the mix. So obviously we're going to need a bit more water. So I'll put in about the same amount again, which is about 1 litre or 2 pints. Now the reason you need a nice running mix is when you place it on the easy mat, it should be able to penetrate into that mat, and also it won't fracture or crack on the surface as it's drying out. Now if you do get fracturing and any cracking as your mix is drying out on the surface, then you know you haven't added enough water. So what you'll have to do is just scrape that back off, wet it up again and put it back on, but make sure it's nice and wet like that. The main thing is that when you start your undercoating is make sure you do your bottom first. And what we're going to do is try and undercoat as much surface as possible, allow it to dry for at least 18 to 24 hours. You may need a little bit longer in a colder climate, and then turn it over and undercoat the top. You may find it necessary to stabilise your frame so it doesn't move when the undercoat is going on. Now this is very important. Solid pieces of material with a bit of weight will do the job quite easily. Now comes the good part. You'll always start with placing your mix right in the middle of your work. So it's virtually just a matter of getting your hands. Just grab a big handful and place it in the middle. As simple as that. And from the middle, we just work out. When you're actually spreading the mix, it's just a matter of using your fingertips. So try and get a fair bit on first and then just move it out. But most importantly, don't apply any pressure onto the surface at all. So important, you can see what I'm doing, it's just lightly spreading this mix with the least amount of pressure as possible. Now the base depth that we want is around about 1/2 inch or 12.5 mils to be exact. The thing is not to apply pressure, and I have to keep mentioning that because people can't help themselves. They've got to get their hands in here and press and prod, and it just makes the whole surface unstable. So the lightweight technique is always the best technique with rock making. If you just stop here and turn your rock over, these edges here are going to be fragile and they're likely to crack. So make sure you cover them well and come right down the face. For doing walls or a vertical surface, what you need to do is stand side onto your work. Take a smaller handful of mix in your hand, very gently place it on it and just push your hand along until the mix is completely out of your palm. Now what you need to look for is weaknesses in the actual walls themselves, because what happens is there's so much moisture in this aggregate mix that the moisture falls down and tends to pull the mix with it. So this is why I just take this brush, gently go over the surface. If it does start to dry out a little bit, what you can do is just tip your brush in some water. What this will do is just help this mix soak in even better. You may have noticed with real rock that the colours on the surface of that rock works in gradients. That means that quite often the bottom of a rock is actually lighter in colour than the top. So seeing this as the bottom and keeping that in mind, I'm just going to throw some dry sand with colour onto this surface. Now the only time you can do this is while this mix is still wet. It won't work when it's dry. So to get this done, the first thing you need is some dry sand. Now this should be fine dry sand. And add to that a light colour. In this case what I'm using here is some yellow colourlast powder. Now what a colourlast powder is, it's a powder that's a combination of oxide, an off-white cement or colourless cement, and some aggregate sand. So by putting this in, what I'm going to end up with is the look of crushed sandstone. Just take your hand and mix that in. Don't overmix the colours and the sand when you're putting it together. And you'll end up with a colour just like that. The following task is quite easy. All you do is take some sand in your hands and just start sprinkling it on. Try and get a good cover. And what will happen is that the moisture that's already in the mix will fasten this sand onto the surface so you get a permanent finish. To break up this yellow colour, I'm just going to take a spoonful of orange or mango colourlast powder, throw it into my sand, mix it up and throw that on as well. Be generous with the sand. It's much better to have plenty than not enough. You couldn't get a much simpler technique than just taking dry sand and throwing it onto a wet cement surface, but the effect can be absolutely stunning. Approximately 24 hours since I was putting this undercoat on, which is set quite well now. And as you can see, I've turned the rock over, or the future rock, but I haven't done it by myself. So when you're wanting to turn your rock over, make sure you get help. Now there's two reasons for this. One is because something of this size is going to be no good for your back, and if you slip as you're turning the rock over and it falls on its side, it's going to crack. So make sure that when you're turning rocks over, always get some help. Careful of sharp, hard edges pressing against a freshly cemented base. Just a few sheets of paper or a cloth will do to make sure you avoid surface cracks. as with doing the bottom, you just start in the middle. Now the difference here is that we've got to join up with mix that was put on yesterday. So what has to happen here is to make sure is that you actually overlap your new aggregate mix onto the old. To help with the adhesion of the new mix to the one that's already set, I'm just going to paint on what's called bond and seal. This is a liquid adhesive, and what this will do is assist the actual bonding process. So all you need to do is paint a little bit of this on. Take some of your wet aggregate mix, just rub it over like you saw yesterday, and just make sure you go over onto the now dry mix, or the dry undercoat. This way you'll end up with a nice strong bond. But whatever you do, don't just put your new mix on the edge of the old, because it won't be strong enough. You make sure that you overlap. So when you're using the bond and seal, just do a small area at a time. This will make sure that by the time you get to put your new mix on, this hasn't gone dry, whereas it'll lose its gripping properties. Finish off this undercoat, what we need to do is take a brush and just go along and lightly brush along the joins where the new undercoat mix is going onto the one we did yesterday. So that just tidies that up. So the join basically is not seen, it virtually disappears. While this undercoat's still wet, you might as well take advantage of it and throw a bit more coloured sand on the sides and work it up towards the top. If you do run a little bit short of sand, what you can actually do is just take some colourlast powder and sprinkle it lightly over. And just take your still damp paintbrush and just lightly work it around, and you'll see how that colour spreads out. So this is starting to set, so I better start throwing this coloured sand on. Colour these walls up, and all you need to do is just let this dry and go hard, and come back and instantly turn it into a rock. Allow at least 18 hours drying time in a temperate to warm climate and 36 hours in cold climates. Or you can add an accelerator to your undercoat mixes to get them to set at a faster rate. Just check with your hardware store. And now, as you can see, it's set quite hard. You just need to take a hose and get rid of this excess sand on the top. If you don't have a hose, just grab a bucket, put some water in it and a paintbrush, and just scrub it off. Top coat mix is quite a bit different than the undercoat mix or the aggregate mix. First of all, there's no aggregate, and I don't use any rock bonding fibre. It's just straight sand and cement. Now the sands are very important. First of all, I use a bricklaying sand and combine that with a plasterers or concreting sand. The reason I use two sands is one gives the pliability, that's the bricklayer's sand, and the concreting sand gives the firmness and sets very hard. The idea is to combine your sands, mix them together, and then your top coat will be a combination of 3 parts sand, 1 part cement. You don't need to make the top coat anywhere near as wet or sloppy as the undercoat. I'll just get my gloves. And the only tools you're going to be needing for doing this work is a screwdriver and of course the faithful paintbrush. Very important that the sand and cement is thoroughly mixed. So just take your time with that and take a little bit of Bond and Seal and just lightly brush some of that over the surface, and that will help with the adhesion of the new onto the old. Before I just start throwing this mix anywhere, I'm going to just pick a few points up here that I'd like to get a little bit of height with, so we get some real character into the surface of this rock. So you just need to be aware while you're doing this that there should be some weight distribution. So what I like to do is use a bit more mix on the surface, but down on these walls just try and keep my spread of mortar quite thin. So I still end up with a top coat texture but not heaps of weight down there. Now there's a few different ways you can apply this top coat onto the surface. The first one is just plop it on like that, very simple. The second way is getting it to stick onto these walls. Is just take a small amount in your hands and just gently plop it on. Or you can also take a small amount in your hands and just rub it along the wall face. So if you really like working with your hands, you may have found your calling. When you get to this stage, just be careful you don't start patting this mix down and making it firm. Keep it nice and loose. The next step is to add some colour. So what this will be is colour last powders. I'm going to start off with an off-white and then do a light coating of charcoal. This is the charcoal, and what I need to do is just very lightly sprinkle some over this off-white coloured surface. The effect you should be aiming for is more specks of colour. And that should be enough. This is where the real fun begins. Now to get it started, take an old paintbrush. You need to hold it down low, not back like this. Just keep your fingers over the base of the paintbrush. Dip it in some water, and generally you start right in the middle and just softly tamp down on that wet sand and cement surface. Very simple. So when you first start off, just use the paintbrush softly and just see what sort of shapes come out, because you can use those to good effect. And one of the things you've got to be careful of is not to keep dipping your brush in the water all the time. Once you've dipped your brush in water, keep using it and tamping with it until you start to pick up bits of sand and cement and colour. And once you do that, you dip it in again. You can see what's happening on the surface here. We're getting a nice model effect. Two colours merging in, but still distinctive streaks of black and also the off-white. An area you need to be careful with is on these edges. So what can happen is if you keep pressing with your brush downwards, you can actually make the sand and cement collapse. So what you should do is change your direction and come in from the sides and press at an angle, such as I'm doing here, and forcing the cement up, which is creating a nice edge, but will avoid that sand and cement collapsing there. And then you can come along and just gently tap along the top. That's the first part of shaping and colouring. The next step is you need to use just a little bit more off-white colourlast powder and just very lightly spread that over the surface. Then I do a repeat with the charcoal colourlast, but just a little bit, not quite as much as the off-white. So the most difficult thing in doing this is to get it sparsely spread without leaving big clumps of colour everywhere. So it may just take a little bit of practice. The other thing that's handy is if you can hold your hands away from your work and not too close. We're also going to include a few brighter colours, some yellow and some orange. What I'd like to do is to get a nice sand type texture on the surface here, so that'll require throwing on some dry sand with just a hint, just a dash of charcoal colourlast mixed with it. Make sure your sand's really dry. There's no colour in that. Now I'm just going to add just a little bit, as I said before, charcoal colourlast, and just lightly mix it in. And then it's just a matter of taking your sand and just spreading it completely over the surface. And this really starts to add a nice texture. Or should I say a very realistic texture. One thing you'll see a lot of is very nicely shaped artificial rock, but when you get up close to it you can see it's obviously artificial. But I think you'll find with these techniques it's going to be very difficult to distinguish between the real thing and not. To get the look of age and wear on a rock's surface, There's two things you're going to need. The first is a mould so that you can make those impressions. And the second thing is that you need to use a mould as soon as you put your sand on while your sand and cement mix is still wet. Now you may or may not be aware of this, but moulds are quite expensive. So I have Keith's impression of the inexpensive mould, just little bits of basalt types of rock with nice impressions on them. And all you need to do, keeping in mind that your top coat mix needs to be still wet, is press these pieces of rock onto the surface, and just to help you along, just use a rubber mallet, don't tap it too hard, and you'll end up with impressions. And you can just take one rock, for example, and just move it around and see what you end up with. Now, of course, you can vary your moulds. You might have a few pieces of rock. This one's quite a bit different, so we'll see how this goes. After making your impressions, go over those worked areas with a bit more sand texturing, but remember to do this straight after using those natural moulds. This is one of the last jobs that needs to be done. So what's required is to take a dry paintbrush, make sure it's dry, and just gently go along and tamp over the impressions that you've made, just to make sure everything sticks on. You can also use a screwdriver. Now you can see where I've got these little ledges here. You can even make them look more realistic by just taking the point of that screwdriver and just very gently running it under the ledge, giving it a sharper edge. So the technique for using the screwdriver is just a very subtle sawing action. Use the brush to remove excess mortar and soften the freshly cut edges. The drying time or setting time for the top coat is the same as with the undercoat mix. It's nice and dry now, so fortunately there's not much to do. The only thing now is to wash off the excess sand and then just put a bit of sealer over the top and it's finished. While the rock's still wet, it's a good time to brush on some Bond and Seal. Now what this will do, it'll help seal in the initial colours we've put on, and while the Bond and Seal is still wet, it can act as a glue. So what I'm going to do is just throw on a bit of mixed dry sands. By mixed I mean I've got three different colours in here, a yellow, a black and a green. And I'm going to get a nice moss-like textured finish on the surface.